We are excited. So everybody, I think we have enough people now, right, to go ahead and kick it off. So I just want to welcome everybody from Hardin County as well as Derby City Agile. We just hit over 700 members. Woo-hoo! And now Jay, I got Jay's name wrong. He's going to introduce our awesome speakers that I'm super excited about. So we love you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. We do have a few more people joining in here. I'd like to give it maybe 2 more minutes before we get started because they're just now coming in. So I want to make sure that everybody gets your intro in there. So if you want to get any last minute coffee in, last minute water, Red Bull, your beverage of choice. I don't know if it's too early for beer, but we'll start in about 2 minutes on an intro here.
Sounds good.
Well, it sounds like hearing from Steve, a lot of things going on there. So,
you know, I mean, when I started this journey off, Jeff, you're part of the Agile Meetup, and you guys, did the first conference and helped us so much. But at that time, this group didn't exist.
yeah.
So we really, to have 700 members and have the community come together the way they have has been really incredible.
Well, kudos to you for doing all the wrangling.
You know what? I love it. So it's.
Hey, Anna.
Hi.
Hey, Jeff.
Hi.
Naftali.
So we're going to give people 1 more minute here to join. Looks like we're approaching 30. So we keep coming in. So.
Okay, and for those just joining, here she is again. Go a couple minutes. Okay, ready, Sibes? She looks very excited. Here you go.
Wish we can hug her.
And she lets me put her in all kinds of ridiculous outfits.
All right. We have hit the 12 o'clock mark. We're at 40 people, so let's go ahead and get started here. As more people come in, I'll unmute. As Anna mentioned, myself and her, lovely co-organizers of the Derby City Agile Meetup. Due to the circumstances, we have gone virtual to still give our group and our audience a plethora of knowledge around not only the Agile community in Louisville, but also international now. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Jay Brown. Work out of our Louisville office here for Smart Data. We do IT services, mainly focused around digital transformation for enterprise clients. Anna has a wonderful training company that she runs that she'll speak to a little bit more later on. But we're excited to still be offering great speakers.
Jay, you went muted.
Yeah.
And today we do have Ardita Karaj and Jeff Morgan. Some of you might know him as Cheezy. I would need a backstory about that later on. They are both from Industrial Logic Canada.
Yeah.
I will let them do a quick intro. They're going to be talking about continuous delivery today. I believe there's a presentation, and then we would like to do a Q&A session. So as you come up with questions during the presentation, we do have the Zoom chat option available. Put your questions in there, and then towards the end, we'll get those answered. And I believe Anna will do some closing remarks. So Ardita, Jeff, please take it away.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quickly. Give me just a second.
So there's a reason why we are not keeping social distance at this point, because we are husband and wife. We live together. And otherwise we would be on different screens.
And can everybody see? Hang on just 1 second. Sorry.
Oh, absolutely. I can see that machine. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
You can see everything now? Everything is okay?
Yes, sir. At least to me it is.
All right. Excellent. So we're going to go ahead and get started then. And we're going to probably have to go kind of quickly because we want to save up plenty of time at the end for questions.
Yeah.
So let's just get started. Thank you for the introduction, Jay. I think we'll not focus on us at all, and we'll just keep moving, other than just to say that we are with Industrial Logic Canada. So we live here in Toronto, and we are huge proponents of modern Agile. In fact, we're going to talk about a couple of those principles today: deliver value continuously, and experiment and learn rapidly. So
Yeah, this comes from the very start of the Agile Manifesto that says we are uncovering better ways. So we haven't stopped covering, we are continuously uncovering. So it's about continuously looking from where Agile started and where to go from there.
all right. So we're going to start with a story, and this story is about one of our customers. And I'm going to say that this happened, actually, what I'm going to describe happened before we started doing work with the customer. So the customer wanted to make some changes to a site that they have. And this particular customer is very, very high volume. So they have literally, tens of thousands, if not a few 100,000 people that come to their site every day. And so the product owner decided, we want to make a change to the way that users can navigate through our system to make it easier. So they got started, and the first thing that they needed to do is they needed to come up with a high-level design for it. Why? Well, they needed to do that because they needed to put together an estimate, and they needed to have some idea of what it was. And why did they need the estimate? Well, they needed the estimate because they had to get budget approval for it. So eventually they got all of the budget approval, but by the time that they had the budget approval, there wasn't quite a team ready yet, but so they had to wait, actually a little while, but eventually there was a team who was ready and able to do it. So they build the system and they eventually roll it out. And so what happened after they rolled it out is they started watching users actually go into the system, because you see, what they had is they had this nice little pop-up that happened whenever a user would come there, and it would show them like a video and some pictures of what the change was, and it had a little checkbox on the bottom where they can actually opt in to use this new review or this new navigation. And so what they saw is the first day, some users came out, they got to 2%, they got to 5%. To 6, 7%, and the developers were really happy as they watched more and more users go into the system. 8%, eventually they topped out at only 9% of their users opting to go into this new user interface, this new navigational system. And the challenge with that is it took them more than a year to actually build that. So in other words, from the time that the product owner had the idea until it went through budget, till it got all the way out through development into the user's hand, it was more than a year. So my question for you is, how many of you would raise your hand and say, yeah, that I can relate to that? By the way, we can't see you if you are raising your hand, so we're just going to assume that you're doing that. So
Can you?
So anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So what he's talking about is the fact that within a year, they learned that only 9% of their clients are interested in this. Maybe a year before, when that product owner thought about that, maybe that would have had different results. So we have this environment where things change, people change, needs change. COVID, this virus is a perfect example of how unpredictable things can be. And then we have this product manager that is in there and is supposed to bring to the team the most valuable thing to do. But the product manager needs to look at the world. And when I say the world, in the world we look for shareholders, stakeholders, clients, competition, viruses, anything that can happen that changes around and changes the need and changes the focus and requires an adjustment or reprioritization and a continuous work on the backlog for that team to always work on the highest value, right? So to bring things together, we usually have things like design thinking. If you have used it, if you haven't used it, probably you should, or read about it. It is a good way to really put the problem from the human point of view, from the client point of view. And you go through these cycles. You empathize, so you define the problem, then you ideate on some solution, you prototype on something, you test it to get some feedback, to make a decision to continue or not. Now, the thing is that with the design thinking going this way, it usually takes a lot of time, and speed sometimes is important when it comes to learning. It is all about learning, right? It's not that we need to make the money right away. Usually you need to learn something and then you need to make the decision on the money. So you can see how the ideate, prototype, and test are those really key steps that we want to go quickly, because based on what we learn from those, we can go back and say, maybe we didn't define the right problem, or maybe we haven't looked into the client in the right way, and go always looking back and improve with data in hand on what we want to really, really put in the hands of the customers. Now, there's another story that we want to talk about this, and I'm going to go very quickly.
Okay.
Because you told the story, now it's my time to tell.
Okay. Okay.
So Jeff Patton at Agile 2011 told this story, and it is about when they were testing in 1990s, right? They were testing in Japan the color of CDs, right? They invited a lot of people, and they said, hey, you're gonna take part on a survey, and based on the feedback that we will get from you, we will make some decisions on what to do. And they said, one of the questions was, what is the color, your preferred color for a CD? Like we used to have those CD discs there, right? And people would go crazy with like fuchsia and like disco colors and vibrant green and all of that. At the end, when they were leaving, they were told, can you, as a thank you, as a gift for participating here, pick a CD. And they were CD player, and they were in the boxes. They were black and silver and some colors. They all picked black. Although in the paper they had written those crazy colors, they all picked black. What we learned from the story is that it is good to involve your client, but don't always do what the client tells you. Do what the client does. So the difference between what they wrote on that survey and the difference between what they wanted in reality, it was two very different things.
So the real learning came whenever they watched them pull something out of the bin.
It was not the survey. So the pulling out of the bin was the survey, not what was written on the paper. So what we're learning here is that we usually make a lot of assumptions, and we usually start with, well, let's look at what happened yesterday, and then based on that, we can predict today or tomorrow. And one way is to use perception. So we do some roadmaps that we have a good idea that we think, okay, following these roadmaps, we're going to get what we want. We believe we know it all. We do those estimations to convince ourselves that we are on the right path, right? And then we execute strongly on those. The other way, the other one is, another way is the reality, which is there's going to need to be a lot of ways for us to pivot, to change, to adjust, because the reality is that things change. And one thing that we can do is to learn how to embrace these changes, and how to explore and how to learn with hypotheses and results that we see in hand. So between perception and between reality, I would go with reality because perception is a lagging indicator that you have to wait for the end to tell you if you made it, like you waited a year to get the 9%. But reality is more of a leading indicator that tells you, well, are you on the right path? Are you, is it worth continuing? Is it worth changing and adjusting?
So our talk is about continuous delivery. That's what we're going to focus on.
Oh, really? I forgot about that.
Yes.
Okay.
So we kind of wanted to start at a little bit of a high level and try to come up with some ideas just to kind of seed the rest of the conversation. So what does continuous delivery mean? That's an interesting question. So we're going to bring two perspectives here real quickly. The first one is developer perspective, and that is that every line of code written by all developers goes to production with each commit. So in other words, if I'm a developer and I'm going to develop something today, and after 2-3 hours or so, I'm going to say, you know, I've made enough changes. I'm ready to commit this into the source code repository. And that would start a process that would take that code all the way to production.
It's okay. What is the other one?
Well, the second part of this is that why would we do such a thing?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not just because we love to put something in production. You know, a typical team or typical product group, as a result, is putting something in production, you know, 100 to 300 times a day. So the reason is because what we want to do is we want to run experiments in production with our customers. And why do we want to do this? Because we want to put something in front of them and see which CD player they pull out of the bin.
Yeah.
We actually don't want to assume that we know what they want. We want to watch what they do, what they actually do, capture that, and to take that knowledge and roll it right back into our product. And the goal is to build better products.
Mm-hmm. Because this is our belief. Continuous delivery should be driven by the business. And then we bring that extremely important there. Boom. Because it is all about the business, right? You can build a very fast car, but if it doesn't take you to the places you want to go, it doesn't matter. And that's why we always bring the business need in front. If the business is not competitive, if the business is not looking for that edge and learning quickly, well, yeah, probably developers don't need to deliver very often. But if the business is, on the other side, really competitive and is looking for always for the edge and being ahead of the other companies and being on the path of the client, then business is the one that needs this speed on the back into testing and delivering and testing and learning.
And I'll just go as far as saying that if there's one slide you want to remember in this talk, this is the one.
It's extremely important.
So the successful continuous deployment, continuous delivery engagements that we've had, where we actually are doing this with product, where we are delivering many times a day to production, have all been driven by the business. Mm-hmm. So remember this, please. Mm-hmm. So we're going to get into some of the nuts and bolts here a little bit. So whenever we think about continuous delivery, it requires us to rethink a lot of the things that we typically do. So we have to change the way we decide what we're doing, how we develop what the app itself, and of course the testing strategy or the testing approach has to change dramatically.
Mm-hmm. So let's start with the decide. So company decides the strategy and outcome, and we do need this direction. Otherwise, everyone can do things on their own or what they believe it would be the right thing, and it would be like disjointed actions. It would be something that everyone might be doing something really amazing, but when it comes together, it doesn't make sense. So we need that strategic direction and a clear outcome, and then everybody will work together to achieve those. We need product and business to decide the intent. Well, now that we have the strategy, now that we have these outcomes, what would be the ways for us to achieve these? And it is not just a math. It is not just a head, right? You need also the heart on bringing this together, and the knowledge that you have on the client need, the knowledge that you have on your stakeholders and shareholders and everybody that is involved. So it requires a little bit of work, but you need to decide the intent. And then with that in hand, you bring together all the skills, all the people, all the talent that you have that is required to deliver on these. So starting from an end-to-end, take an end-to-end view on who is needed and pull these people together to work together and decide what is next. Don't right away create a backlog of user stories. Start with a backlog of questions. Start with a backlog of experiments, because those are the ones that are going to define later what to do. And the best people to decide on that are the people that are actually the doers, the ones that are going to work on this, the ones that are going to solution on this. And so usually we start with hypothesis, right? You never ever will start with something and say, I know exactly this is going to happen. You have an idea. You believe that by doing something, you will see something. So ideate that hypothesis and bring it as an hypothesis, because that opens the door for innovation, for solutions to come in place from different areas, and from everyone to participate in it, not just to be an order taker, but to participate in the solution. So start with a hypothesis, and the hypothesis say, we believe that by doing X, we will see Y, and we know we are successful when a couple of metrics move from X to Y, right? So start with that. With that in mind, then we start delivering. We deliver something small, and think it is about experimentation and learning at this point. It is not about a big bang delivery that is going to start giving you right away the benefits you expected. I use the term learning release versus earning release. You're going to have some learning releases before you start making money and earn out of it. So start delivering these learning releases and learn in production. Don't learn just by asking a product owner or a VP. They don't really represent the client in reality. And then the last one is analyzing that learning. What did we learn? What was the data that we collected? What is telling us so we can decide for the next hypothesis? And it is this circle that you have to go over and over. And you can see how if you go quickly through this cycle, you can learn faster, you can decide the next thing faster, and that roadmap that is long, it's usually expires quickly, because the new learning invalidates some of the things you had put in that roadmap. That's why we say work with hypothesis and work with this continuously delivering and learning from it. So what do we do, Cheezy, when we say delivering quickly?
Well, I want to just put that a little bit of concreteness around that.
Okay.
Whenever we talk about doing this rapidly, like you said, Ardita, what most teams who do this well, what they do is they design those experiments such that they can actually, from the idea to production with that experiment, measure it in a day or two.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we got the idea, and a day or two later, it's in front of users and we're gathering data. Now, we might let that idea set in with the users for another week or two, just so we make sure that we gather enough data.
Gather more data.
But the key is to take these small little examples, roll them very rapidly. Now, for most organizations, the idea of delivering something to production in a day or so is very foreign. And so we're going to talk about some of the changes that have to happen in order to help us achieve that.
I always ask Cheezy about that. I only work with hypothesis, and I said, Cheezy, can you do this quick for me?
She especially does that whenever it's dishes to be done at the house.
Anything to learn.
So clearly the approach that we take to achieving quality has to change dramatically. And we have to do a lot to drive risk out of the system. So I'm going to geek out just a little bit and talk about some of the more common practices that we see very prevalent in organizations and teams that are doing this. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump down and get a little bit geeky with in the code, first of all. So first thing, source code branches. They have to go away. Source code branches, delay integration, it drives toward messy code. We'll talk to me about that later if you want to. It drives a huge amount of risk. And that sort of risk is absolutely unacceptable in a continuous delivery. So we go to trunk-based development. Another thing is we don't do pull requests. Pull requests delay integration. Okay, pull requests assume that there is a gate, if you will, before the changes that we make go out to production, go out to the users. And some people use these to ensure code quality or to ensure that people are adhering to standards or to maybe even help with training with some of the more junior developers on your team. The challenge is that is hurting you. So there are better ways to take care of all of those things that we've just discussed. And I'm not going to go into the details of that in this talk because I don't believe we'll have enough time. But pull requests typically don't exist. Last thing in the code itself.
But they can ask you later if they want to know more.
If you want to know more, we're going to
Twitter, LinkedIn,
and we're going to save time at the end for questions or reach out to me on Twitter. Feature toggles. If you haven't heard of these before, think of this as a way to gate your code. So let's say, again, I'm going to develop one of these experiments, and it's going to take me a day and a half to build that experiment. So 2 hours into day one, I want to push my code out to production because I want to integrate. I don't want to drive risk of having a whole day's worth of code not integrated, but I don't want that the feature thing that I'm building isn't finished yet. So feature toggle is the way that I can safely deploy that with that code turned off. Furthermore, the other thing that feature toggles do is typically companies who do this very well, they put those toggles in the hands of the product folks. And this allows the product folks to make decisions around when and how to roll out the change. So for example, toggles don't have to be just on or off, but instead you can decide to segment by province, for example. You can say, I want to roll this out to Ontario, and then you can decide, let me start with just 1%, just so I can watch for a while, and then the product owner can decide to ramp up to 25 to 50 or whatever. So it is a very, very, very valuable tool.
Yeah, he's speaking provinces because he's from Canada. Excuse him. Another thing I want to add from the business point of view, when he said we leave feature toggles in the hands of the business. Remember when I said that there are many learning releases before we get to the earning release? You can control these learning releases by feature toggles, and you leave that in the hands of the business because they are the one that need to drive the strategy and all to segments that we are delivering this and all of that. So it removes the stress from developers into, oh my God, I'm breaking down the production, to giving to business that flexibility to test in production with the right demographic and segment of clients.
Okay, so I want to talk about how do we actually test this code, because if we're building something rapidly, clearly we have to make sure that it's tested before we push anything to production. So the first thing I want to say is in this workspace, there is no such thing as a testing phase. In fact, we can't have a testing phase because the code is in production already. So the difference is that it kind of falls on the hands of the people who are building the code to actually ensure that it works. Now, that's a crazy idea. I know. It's a crazy idea that somebody who builds something has to make sure it works. I don't think it'll ever work. But anyway, I've got a little bit more to say about that. So when I talk about this idea of end-to-end tests, this is a test that maybe drives through a UI, drives through all of the different layers of the system, and ultimately hits a backend database or whatever it might be. So in this world that we're talking about, we really don't do any end-to-end automation of any sort. Why? Well, first of all, they're incredibly low value tests. They tell us very little about the system. Second of all, they're incredibly brittle. They fail all of the time. And the vast majority of the time that they fail, they don't fail because there's a defect. They fail because something in the environment has changed, or login is down, or somebody changed the data, or whatever it might be. And whenever I'm working in a place where I need complete reliability of my code, I need to know and understand exactly where my system is and what is the quality that I have at each stage. There's no way that I can take unreliable tests and leverage those to help me utilize that. So instead, we use very, very different things altogether. And so I'm going to talk about this briefly. So this is a very, very busy diagram. This is one that we're actually using at my client where I'm at right now. And I'll kind of walk you through it one little piece at a time. As you can see, I've got functional and non-functional tests there. And let's start on the functional side. So first of all, unit tests are the foundation of exactly how we test the vast, vast majority of our system. Why? Well, whenever you look through that, if you think of that previous where we talked about all the different layers of the system, there literally are hundreds, possibly thousands of decision points in each of those layers. An end-to-end test that just basically goes through and back, there's no way it could come close to actually testing all of the behavior, all of those decision points of that code. Unit tests run very fast. When they're built properly, they are not brittle, and they can give us the foundation and the confidence that we need that our system is working as we expect it to. The second type I want to talk about is this thing called a component test. This would be where we would actually start up maybe a component, maybe an Angular front end, maybe a Spring Boot service, but that it's mocked. So if it's a front end, whatever it's talking to, there are mocks there. It doesn't actually talk to them. If it's a service layer that we're working at, whatever it talks to, it's mocked as well. So we have a few of these, and these, think of these as just a little bit larger tests, test a little bit larger scope. Contract tests, again, if you have service-oriented architectures where you have services that you're trying to reuse them, we want to get away from this business where the back end makes a change and then they reach out to the 14 groups on the front end and say, okay, go test and see if my change breaks your app. That's waste. And so instead, what we do is we put this level of test in place so that that back end team will run this test. And if the test fails, they'll know that it breaks the usage for a specific team. Last but not least, in the functional layer, we have this thing called exploratory testing. And this is typically the only place where we would run things fully end-to-end, fully integrated. Often this takes place in production. Remember those things called feature toggles we talked about? The feature toggle can be structured so that when we're in production, we can turn on some new feature just for the team or just for the product people. We can get this out to production. We can test it. We can make sure that everything is working right before we start to open it up to others. I'm going to quickly go through the non-functional. Visual inspection, again, make sure that it looks right, become more detail-oriented. Accessibility, security, I'm going to go through these quickly. Capacity, the capacity is more of your load and performance type of testing. I'm putting code quality in here because for us, the quality of your code is a quality metric. So we use tools like Sonar or something like that to give us constant feedback that our code quality is high. And if it's not, we shut down our pipelines. Monitoring, know what's happening in production. Get quick warnings if something is different. We push a new release out, and all of a sudden the number of new orders goes down, or all of a sudden our production profile is different. We want to know about that right away. And so we can back it out or back it down with a feature toggle if we need to. Deployment compliance. Any large organization, there are compliance type of things. We consider this part of our quality and something that should be handled by our pipeline. Mm-hmm. So we decide these on a story-by-story basis, and the developer and others on the team own this. The next category I'm going to talk about is one of eliminating risk. A lot of people think of this as DevOps, so I want to start right away and say DevOps is not a department, period. If you have a DevOps department, it's not a bad start. I mean, it's a kind of a nice way to sort of bring those in, but don't believe that has anything to really do with DevOps. DevOps is about empowering your development teams to drive risk out of the system, to streamline. So they and they alone need to define how their pipeline works, what runs in it. They need to define alone their production targets and their deployment strategies. So I know that's going to be a little bit controversial because every company, when they get started with DevOps ideas, they create a DevOps department who imposes a specific standard on everybody. Like I said, think of that like the training wheels. That's a way to get started, but sooner or later you need to push all of that responsibility into the development teams. Another thing that we do to help us drive risk down is we put in place these deployment pipelines. And I wanted to just kind of give you an example of what that could look like. By the way, what we're going to look at is by no means how a pipeline should look. It is just an example. The team who is responsible for the app, who is responsible for quality, must define this. Mm-hmm. So we're going to walk through an idea. So here's an example of one. Every time a developer checks in code, the first thing that happens is all the unit tests run, maybe some static analysis tests, maybe even some kind of idea of a smoke test. So if stage one passes, they go to another stage, which might run maybe some additional automation. Again, these might be the component tests. They should be mocked. If stage three, let's run a subset across multiple browsers. Let's make sure these are mocked. We want to also pull our security, dynamic and static security tests into our pipeline. Performance, clearly, if that's a key element or a key requirement for the component that's going down the pipeline, that needs to be handled as well. And as a final step, it needs to go to production. And a good target is that all of this happens in less than 30 minutes. So separating release from deployment is a core concept of continuous deployment. Mm-hmm. And how does that work? Well, feature toggles are a piece of that tool. You can think of it like this. The deployment side is a technical decision. We deploy code constantly. Every time we make a little change, we integrate it and we deploy. Mm-hmm.
While the release one is a business decision, because the release one is where now the product manager has run all these tests, is confident on the results. All the marketing material, all the operations, everything that is needed to support this release have had a chance to see it, to be prepared, to get ready for it. And that release, when it goes out, it has nothing to do with developers' work that they have done right until now. Developers have probably started working on something else. They don't stay up at night. They don't wake up into making pushes and rolling back at night. No.
Don't need to know what happens.
It is a known event. Everybody sleeps, and all the materials that are needed for that big release are ready, and they go as planned. So separating these two, it's a huge difference, reducing the stress, making the release actually it gives you control, right? It gives you that control in hand to give the right impact in the market.
So we're going to talk about a real client.
Yes.
And this is the client where Ardita and I are both working right now. And they have given us permission to talk about them and use them as an example. And I've actually got some data from them that I'm going to share as well. But we're not supposed to mention their name.
Or put their logo on
or their logo,
okay,
or whatever it might be. So we're not supposed to mention their name. So we'll just say that it is the big bank in Canada. Okay? So just to give you an idea of how big they are, they have over 80,000 employees. They have over $40 billion in revenue. I believe it's like 1.5 trillion in assets, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And not to give you a hint or anything, but they're royal blue. And
and they are 150 years old.
That's right. That's right. So we're talking about a really, really large company right now. And so those of you who think that what we have been talking about so far
is just for startups,
is just for startups and tech firms, here's an example that counters that, and we have many, many others. So let's talk about it. Whenever we started working there, they were following kind of a basic Scrum process, and one where they were doing more your typical release planning, and maybe a release might be something that would span out a few months, maybe something smaller. You know, it would really depend on which one it was, but they were following a Scrum process. Mm-hmm. So the team structure as well was such that we had all of the basic team members on the teams. One of the very first things that we started doing is we started introducing the idea that we don't have QA, that there is no QA staff, but instead that the developers do all of the testing. And add to that the designers and the product owners as well. The other thing that we did was we said that we really actually don't need the role of a Scrum Master as well. So in this group, what happens is the developers just take turns in the role of a Scrum Master. And the final thing that's happened from a methodology standpoint over time is as the teams have gotten to a point where they are able to release more and more frequently, which we'll get into that in just a moment, what they've realized is that the majority of what is Scrum was not really relevant anymore. Teams that are deploying code and releasing code every single day, the whole idea of release planning, sprint planning, these kind of things just sort of become less and less important. So we ended up migrating more and more toward a Kanban approach, where we have very much focused on limiting our WIP. We map out the Kanban, the stories, all the way out to production. Mm-hmm. Next, we started visualizing everything that's happening. We started trying to visualize the code quality, generate reports, visualize the tests that are running, visualize pipelines, and had the teams start to really know and understand how they're doing currently. And last but not least, we made some decisions around some metrics that we wanted to start to track. So if you haven't heard of DORA, the first 5 metrics here are what are part of something that's called DORA. And these are the metrics that we track for our teams there. The first one is deployment frequency. How frequently do we deploy code to production? The second metric that we measure is lead time for change. So in other words, from the time a developer commits code, how long is it until that change makes it to production? The third metric that we use is time to restore service, or mean time to recovery. You might be familiar with that. In other words, if there is a defect, if there is some problem, an outage even, how long does it take us to revert that problem? The fourth metric is change failure rate, and we include the pipeline with this. What percentage of the time that we make change does it result in some form of a failure? So if your pipeline fails, a test fails in the pipeline, that is a failure. Availability is the next one that we look at. Clearly, we have to have things, our systems have to be available. It's very, very critical for a bank. And early on, we added one called escaped defects. I can tell you that the majority of the teams really don't actually track this anymore because it became pretty close to a non-event. You know, that usually they have 0, 1, maybe 2, but there are so few. The thing to note about these is these are all outcome based. So we're no longer focusing on, do you have a stand-up? We're no longer focusing on, do you have X number of stories groomed in your backlog, or what is your adherence to a methodology, or anything of the sort. But instead, We're looking at the outcomes that we want to achieve. We want to rapidly be able to deliver value to our customers. And we allow the teams to ideate and to iterate on their methodology to achieve these. So how well does it work? Well, it just so happens that the client, we built a dashboard that captures all of this data real time. And so here's like a little screenshot. It's a little bit dated because I took it a while ago. I can tell you right now, inside of this group, we are deploying to production 3, 4, 5 times a day. So we still have a ways to go. We're not all the way there yet. We're continuing to work on it, but we are deploying to production, like I said, 3 or 4, maybe 5 times a day. So what is our lead time for change from the time that we commit code? Right now, it is under 2 days until that gets to production. Like I said, we are still on the journey. And this again, these are a little bit dated. I think it would probably be less now. I grabbed these snapshots a couple of months ago. And we were deploying 3 times per day over the previous month, which was up from 2. Again, I think I grabbed this in January of this year. I'm going to say it's probably 4 or 5 today. Now, we're just starting. This specific group still has a long ways to go. We know it, and we're getting there, but we're getting there in a safe way. We're talking about apps that have billions of dollars flowing through it. We're now talking about apps that were responsible for helping the Canadian government get the relief out to individuals and to businesses. We're just starting, but if a large conservative Canadian bank can do this, guess what? You can do this as well. In fact, I'll go a step further and say, not only can you do this, you should do this.
So, yeah, let's leave some time, probably just wrap up quickly for questions. So to wrap up, think about it. You are on the right path. You want a successful business. So drive with intent. Set that intent because that is needed to show the direction. Deliver continuously. That deliver continuously gives you the opportunities to continuously getting better, learn what you see, learn from the impact that you are making and increase that impact. So learn from the customers in production, not on paper, not on surveys, not when you offer them a coffee card to say, hey, would you do this? No, learn what they are willing to buy. And to achieve companies' outcomes, it is all about those specific strategic outcomes. It is not for fun. It is not just because we want to create these fast pipelines. It is to achieve those outcomes, and it is always business driven. So with that, I think let's open the floor for questions. I think there are some questions.
Let's stop sharing our screen real quickly. We're back. We're back.
The chat.
So would somebody like
Jay, did you have a look? Do you know what's going on?
Yeah, so I just posted just a collection of questions that were sort of brought up during the chat. So if you want to take a quick look, and then while you're thinking about those, addressing those, feel free to add in other questions.
Okay.
You want to curate them for us, or ask us, Jay, so that otherwise we're going to have to kind of dig through. So maybe you can.
No, I got you. Yeah, absolutely. So this was, I think, a very high-level question here. So I think it's a good start. Do you find that business drives faster development, or that fast development makes business go faster?
So I find right now that the business always wants to go faster, and that the delivery is in many cases so backward that they're unable to deliver fast. And so as a result, historically, the business has just become used to very, very slow cycles. But that I think if we can build a delivery organization that can very rapidly deliver value, in my experience is that the business loves it, and that they're quite anxious to see that happen.
And you know that is true when business goes, ask the internal IT or whatever partner they need, and they get these long timelines and high cost on their I don't want to get there, but what they do is then they go outside, they hire a third-party vendor that can do it faster and probably less cost. So if business does that, that means that business has a lot of needs that the internal IT probably cannot serve.
Hope we
Makes
answered.
sense. Yeah. And if you did ask that question, you have any follow-ups, just please add it in the chat. There was a little bit of discussion about, as soon as you mentioned no branches, in terms in terms of feature release and rollbacks. How do you handle a rollback?
You typically never roll back. You typically roll forward. So, but by the way, branches are not what will let you roll forward or backward. So yeah. Let me put some context here. Branches are often what a lot of companies use because they develop things for a long time. They usually have multiple things going on at the same time, and they don't know what's going to be done when. So they keep them segmented out on separate branches, only to, as we're approaching some magical release date, to try to start to integrate all of those different branches that they want to go out, that they think are good enough. And the challenge is that for the very first time after that's occurred, you have something real. Because what's on those branches is not real at all. What's on those branches is an imaginary thing. That only exists in the context of all the code on the other branches. And so that's why whenever we merge everything, we've got to go through and retest everything all again, because for the first time, we have things together. Number one. Number two, the merges themselves are problematic. So frequently, things accidentally get lost. Bugs are introduced during the merges themselves. Third, I'll throw this out there as well, which is that whenever you're out on a branch, developers are far, far less likely to mercilessly refactor their code. Why? Because they know they have to merge it eventually. So in a continuous delivery world, we use things like feature toggle or some different deployment strategies that I didn't talk about today because of time to actually manage what is released and when. And so as a result, we are able to eliminate all of those problems that exist with branches by continuously merging our code and using things like feature toggle to control when something is released. And like I said, the business often controls that. If we make it all the way to production and something is so egregious that we think that we have to roll back, first of all, we could use a feature toggle to do that. Second of all, we better have an incredibly fast, very, very thorough retrospective to figure out how is our testing so bad, how is our quality so low that something really bad made it into production. So the group where I'm working right now, we do have defects that make it to production, but I can tell you that they are small typically. And the approach that we take is something that we call roll forward. Oh, there it is. And we'll fix it, we'll push it down the pipeline, and as soon as it's through the pipeline, it will resolve that. And so that's typically what you would do. If it is something that's significant, though, we could use feature toggles to revert it. Now, I don't know. I'll probably leave it at that because I want time for more questions. But
there was a follow-up on racing conditions. Does this work for racing conditions?
So racing conditions. So we actually had a racing condition situation where we are. For example, the client I'm working at, they're using Spring Boot on the server process. Spring Boot allows you to slap an annotation on it and create a singleton. And all of a sudden, we created, one developer created a singleton that had mutable data. And in production, it created an issue. In production, it created a problem. And we learned about it, we fixed it in production, and then what we started doing is we introduced a new type of test that was designed to capture that specific thing. The other thing that we did is we tweaked a little bit our load tests so that it would also very likely expose those types of scenarios. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that was a very thorough and great answer. So talking a little bit deeper here, What type of infrastructure do you typically see to enable the experiments to prod? Feature push to prod, I guess, is what I would say there. Is that clear enough to answer, or?
So yeah, maybe we could take a stab at it.
Yeah.
So tagging, analytics, if it's a browser or a mobile app, you want to be able to capture every click, every swipe, every whatever it might be. How long are they spending completing certain tasks? It really the what you capture really is kind of driven by what experiment you're trying to run.
Yeah.
Let me give a really quick example. So I about a year and a half ago, I was working at a client where their software was primarily used by people who were retirement age or approaching retirement. And one of the ideas that they had is that a large number of clients that went there were spending too much time on the pages, or they weren't completing. So one of the ideas was that it was too complex, because we're talking about people who typically aren't really tech savvy. So we started tracing and tracking how much time do they spend completing each activity. And then we started pushing out many, many versions of that software where we would try different ideas. Take this and split it across 2 pages, change the order of this, do this, do that, add this validation, remove this validation. And each time we were gathering measurements around what percentage of people actually were completing the workflow and how much time was it taking them with each of the different business segments, if you will. And so we would had 3 versions out there, and we would see which one would do better. We would shut down other versions. We would bring up new versions. And it was all about constantly, quickly learning, capturing data along the way to help us ensure that we're delivering the right product for that customer segment that they were focusing on.
Okay, great.
There are many apps out there to manage toggles if you want.
Manage toggles and manage the data for the experiments.
Yeah. So
Google Optimize is a great one. Taplytics is an example of one. There's lots of tools out there that you can look at.
Yeah. In the beginning, you mentioned the color of the CD example.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did have a question of, did you have any other examples of how you were able to eliminate assumptions that your customers or clients had into a reality of what they actually wanted?
I can tell you even one that is not even business. Like, I was talking with my neighbor when we could talk with neighbors, and like, what is your favorite car? And he was like, yeah, it's a sport, and I wanted to like convertible and yellow and fast and all of that. And a week from there, I see him buying a new van, and I'm like, why did you buy a van? He said, because I have 3 kids. So there are so many examples like that, I mean, I'm not saying don't ask customers, but try to see more what they do rather than put all your eggs in one answer that they give you.
Absolutely. So in other words, that whenever people are asked questions, they bring biases, right?
Yeah.
And so this particular neighbor's bias was that he's thinking about how great he's going to look when he's driving that sport car down, or whatever it might be. And we can learn a lot from that, but the real learning is to see what they actually do. And the best data that's unbiased is whenever a user is going out to perform some action, some activity, and they're participating in an experiment, and they don't even know that they're in an experiment. Similar to everybody here, the last time you went to Amazon, you were in a minimum of a few dozen experiments that you don't even know about.
One example that I just remembered is a company in UK that they do books for children. The children online with their parents can design the book, can write the story, can put the pictures, and then this company takes that, put it in a book, and delivers it to the child and say, here it is, your book. One of the product owners said, hey, fantastic. We think that if we wrapped the book with some different colors, kids would be more excited to get the books. Right now, they had only one wrapping paper that was like with monkey. And she said, what if we had one with confetti? Now, to add a new wrapping paper, it requires the whole chain on supply management to be changed, because now people need to be trained to read a new type of paper. A new type of paper need to be available and always in stock, and the website had to be updated and everything. So it was not just a simple change. So what they did is they quickly tested into adding at the exit, when the child and the parent was checking out, they said, do you want the monkey paper or do you want the confetti paper? And they just put an example of them. When people clicked the monkey, everything finished. When people clicked the confetti, they got a message, oh, sorry, we're out of stock. So they left that for a short time online, and they collected the data, and they found out that most of the people still wanted the monkey. So they saved all the money that they could have put into creating now this big change. And they said, it's not worth it, keep the monkey.
As opposed to like the customer that I mentioned, where they pushed it all the way out only to learn that it wasn't used.
That they didn't want the confetti.
Experiment and learn rapidly is the key thing here.
We have 2 minutes left.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have time, or should we follow up later?
I know Anna wants to close with something.
Yeah. We'll let Anna take the stage. And is Cyber still around, Anna? You're muted.
Cyber was going to have a nap. She's waking the dog.
Let's see how long it takes her to realize she's muted.
I know we cannot hear you.
She's just kissing on the dog.
There.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you guys so much for this. I think this, I sit with a lot of Chet's classes, and I can tell you that not a lot of companies are doing what you guys are doing, so it is so impressive. So I want to thank you guys and thank everyone for attending. This was over 70 people, which is huge.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
And you guys are awesome. Okay, bye.
And real quick, where can they find you all? Twitter, LinkedIn?
Yes.
Website?
Both of those, Twitter or LinkedIn, work well.
Yeah. Just search us on LinkedIn or on Twitter. We constantly are on those, and we can respond.
And I'll put your LinkedIn profiles on our Meetup group so people can reach out to you guys, because I think you shared a lot of really good tools that people might not have written down, and that way they can reach out if they need anything.
Okay.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for Anna and Jay for having us, and for these great things you're doing for the community there.
Yes.
Yeah, we're excited. So thank you guys. And I'll let you know if we ever do a conference again, we'd love to have you both.
Sounds good.
Okay, bye.
Enjoy the rest of the day.
Bye.
Thank you.